The masked character is one of the most hyped up tropes in all of anime. Maybe it's a sensei whose face becomes a mystery of its own, a villain hiding in plain sight, or even a comic relief character who looks completely different once the mask comes off. And let's be honest, how many times have we thought that if we could just get one split-second frame, we'd finally see Kakashi's actual face, or what Inosuke looked like underneath that boar mask? Luckily, most of these characters eventually do get their reveal. Sometimes it happens in a special episode, sometimes during a major fight, and sometimes the reveal completely changes how we see the character. Because the best face reveals aren't just there for shock value. Sometimes seeing what's underneath the mask tells us something much bigger about the character, their powers, their past, the world they live in, or even why the author chose to hide their face in the first place. And we have to start with probably the most famous hidden face in anime history, Kakashi Hatake. And weirdly enough, Kakashi might also have one of the few face reveals where being anticlimactic was exactly what made it work. Because for years, Naruto fans knew practically everything about this man except what the bottom half of his face looked like. We knew his childhood, his father, Obito, Rin, the Sharingan, his time in the Anbu, pretty much every traumatic experience that shaped Kakashi into one of Konoha's greatest ninja. But his mouth? That was apparently the real classified information. The mystery became such a huge joke that episode 101 of the original Naruto literally had Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura dedicated an entire mission to seeing what was underneath his mask. And naturally, their imaginations went insane. They pictured everything from giant buck teeth to ridiculous lips. Of course, the episode ended with a gag. Kakashi removed the mask and there was another mask underneath. And that joke basically explains why the eventual reveal had such a difficult job. Because the longer Kakashi kept his face hidden, the less this was actually about his face. The mystery itself had become part of Kakashi. So when the series finally showed us what he looked like underneath, trying to give him some enormous scar, deformity, or supernatural secret would have almost felt disappointing. Nothing Kishimoto drew could realistically compete with the years of fans imagining what was there. So he did the exact opposite. When Kakashi finally removes the disguise of photographer Sukeya, and we see his full face, there's no horrifying secret at all. He's just really handsome. Nothing particularly unusual besides a tiny beauty mark near his chin. And that's what makes the reveal work. Kakashi had spent the entire series being treated like this legendary, almost untouchable ninja. The copy ninja, the man famous for copying 1,000 jutsu, and the mentor who always seemed to know more than everyone around him. But underneath one of anime's most famous masks, there was no legendary secret at all. And that's almost the point. It's a narrative choice sometimes described as grounding the legend, taking someone who's built into an almost mythical figure and reminding us that underneath the reputation they're still human. Kakashi didn't need some massive secret underneath the mask to justify his reputation. Everything that made him legendary had already happened with it on. So after years of theories, the least shocking answer became the perfect one. But of course, sometimes the reveal is shocking, full of flair, and looks like it exists purely for high-quality fan service. Hidden underneath that though, there's a pretty clever narrative mechanic I like to call the scale flex. Basically, you hide part of an overwhelmingly powerful character's design while they're operating normally. Then, the moment the story needs to show us what Sirius actually looks like, you reveal it. And from that point onward, the audience makes the connection automatically. If this comes off, somebody is in trouble. For the opening stretch of Jujutsu Kaisen, Satoru Gojo's eyes were the ultimate mystery. He wore a thick black blindfold that completely covered the upper half of his face, while casually running circles around special grade curses and cracking jokes like nothing around him was remotely dangerous. And naturally, that made you wonder why someone this powerful needed to keep his eyes covered in the first place. In universe, Gojo's 6 eyes process an absurd amount of visual information, so covering them helps reduce the constant sensory load. And then came Jogo. At the time, Jogo was one of the biggest threats we'd seen in the series. A special grade curse capable of incinerating normal sorcerers without much effort. Gojo meanwhile spent most of the fight treating him like a tutorial. Then he pulled down the blindfold. For the first time, we properly saw those impossibly bright blue eyes in full detail. Right before Gojo unleashed his domain expansion, Unlimited Void. Up until this point, Jujutsu Kaisen had told us Gojo was the strongest. This was the moment it finally showed us what that actually meant. That is the scale flex. And yes, the reveal also made half the internet understand exactly why this man had so many fans, and just how hard Mappa can flex when it really wants to. Just look at that damn animation. But more importantly, it turned his eyes into a warning sign. Blindfold on, Gojo's playing around. Blindfold off, now you understand why everyone calls him the strongest. Then there is Inosuke Hashibara, whose face reveal works for almost the exact opposite reason. Because before Demon Slayer ever shows us what Inosuke looks like, it does everything possible to make us imagine the wrong face. Just look at the guy. He runs around shirtless with a muscular body, 2 jagged swords, a gravelly voice, and the hollowed out head of a bear covering his entire face. He doesn't enter rooms normally, he crashes through them. He forgets people's names, turns normal conversations into competitions, and seems to operate almost entirely on animal instinct. So naturally your brain starts filling in whatever is underneath that mask. Some scarred up wild man, maybe a terrifying face that actually matches the voice. At the very least, somebody who looks like he was raised in the mountains and fights demons for fun. And that's exactly the trap Demon Slayer sets. Every clue we're given, his body, voice, behavior, weapons, even the dead animal on his head, pushes us toward one visual expectation. Then Tanjiro headbutts him. The boar mask falls off, and underneath it is one of the prettiest faces in the entire show. Soft features, green eyes, long dark hair fading into blue. A face so delicate that even Tanjiro is visibly confused by how little it matches the lunatic he was fighting 5 seconds earlier. And that's where the reveal creates what you could call the visual dissonance trap. But the smartest part is that Inosuke doesn't suddenly behave differently because we've seen his face. He doesn't get embarrassed. He doesn't even really care. He just goes straight back to screaming, fighting, and being the exact same feral idiot he was with the mask on. So the joke isn't that Inosuke secretly wasn't the brute we thought he was. Oh no, he absolutely is. He just unexplainably looks like that. And that contradiction between the face you're looking at and the personality attached to it becomes one of the funniest parts of his entire character. And then there's King the Wildfire, where hiding the face isn't about comedy, mystery, or even looking intimidating. For a king, showing his face could literally get him killed. Throughout the Wano arc, Kaido's strongest commander walks around completely sealed inside black leather, with a spiked helmet, dark goggles, and almost every recognizable feature hidden away. Damn, that must have been hot. Which, considering the giant black wings and permanent flame burning behind him, somehow only make him look even more terrifying. At first it feels like the standard villain design. King is Kaido's executioner. Of course he looks like something that walked out of a dungeon. But during his fight with Zoro, that changes completely. Zoro tears apart King's mask, revealing his dark skin, white hair, and the features that identify him as a Lunarian. And suddenly the mask stops looking like part of a villain costume. It was camouflage. The Lunarians once lived on top of the Red Line and were regarded as gods. But by King's time, they had almost completely disappeared. The world government even offered 100 million berries just for information about them. So King's own face could expose exactly what he was. That turns his reveal into what you could call the dangerous identity. When revealing what's underneath exposes an identity the world itself has made dangerous. And once you know that, King changes from Kaido's cold, almost mechanical right-hand man into one of the last survivors of a people the world tried to erase. Even his loyalty to Kaido starts making more sense. After all, Kaido found him imprisoned, gave him a new name, and also gave him a new ambition. His mask wasn't hiding a face, it was hiding an entire piece of One Piece's history. Sometimes instead of a secret identity, the mask hides an obsession. That's where you get what I'd call the obsession shield. When a character's ridiculous exterior makes an extreme personality trait look like a joke, until the mask comes off and we see how serious that trait really is. And few characters pull that off better than Hotaru Haganazuka, because for most of Demon Slayer, Haganazuka is basically a walking gag. He appears wearing that bright red Hyotoko mask, usually with a massive straw hat and wind chimes hanging off it, and somehow still manages to be one of the most threatening people in the room. Break one of his swords and this man will chase you with a knife like you personally insulted his bloodline. So naturally that became our image of him. Loud, childish, completely unstable. Then the Swordsmith village arc completely flips that. While Haganazuka is polishing an ancient blade, Gyoko attacks him and slices straight through his mask. And that's when we see the man underneath. Long dark hair, with sharp features and a heavy built frame. But the biggest reveal, it's his expression, because Haganazuka barely reacts. There's blood running down his exposed face. An upper rank demon is standing right there trying to kill him, and Haganazuka is still staring at the sword, still polishing it, still completely locked in. That's when the joke surrounding his character suddenly gains another layer. The same obsessive personality that made him hilarious whenever Tanjiro damaged a sword is also what makes him terrifyingly good at his craft. The mask had made that obsession look ridiculous. Taking it off made the exact same obsession look almost inhuman. And that's the clever part. The reveal doesn't change Haganazuka at all. It just removes the comedy from the same man we already knew. Behind that goofy wooden mask was a craftsman so dedicated to his work that even an upper rank demon couldn't make him look away. And from someone whose mask hid the depth of his obsession, we move to someone who used his mask to escape from himself. Because that orange spiral mask didn't just hide Obito Uchiha, it gave him a way to stop being Obito altogether. When Tobi first appeared though, nobody would have guessed that. He was the high-pitched idiot bouncing around the Akatsuki, annoying Deidara, running away from fights and behaving more like comic relief than an actual threat. Then everything changed. His voice dropped, his posture became colder, and suddenly, Tobi was claiming to be Madara Uchiha, one of the most legendary and feared shinobi in history. From that point on, the mask became more than part of his design. It became the identity he hid behind. He manipulated the Akatsuki, helped trigger the Fourth Shinobi World War, and even started describing himself as nobody. And that's important because the mask wasn't simply hiding who Tobi was from everyone else. It was helping Obito hide from Obito. Then during the war, Naruto's Rasengan finally shatters it. The pieces fall away and underneath isn't Madara. It's Kakashi's supposedly dead childhood teammate. Half of his face is still scarred from the cave-in that nearly killed him as a child, but otherwise there is nothing mythical about him. And suddenly, this almost godlike villain becomes painfully human. The man responsible for years of manipulation and an entire world war was once the goofy kid who wanted to become Hokage, constantly competed with Kakashi, and cared deeply about his teammates. So how did that kid become this? He survived the cave-in and was rescued by the real Madara Uchiha. Then he witnessed Rin die by Kakashi's hand, and the grief completely broke his faith in the real world. So he accepted Madara's worldview and began chasing the infinite Tsukuyomi, a dream world where none of that pain would have to exist. And that's what makes his mask an ideological shield. As Tobi, Madara, or simply nobody, Obito could distance himself from the grieving kid he used to be. But once the mask breaks, that distance disappears. Kakashi is no longer fighting some legendary ghost from history. He's fighting the friend he failed to save. And the face reveal takes one of Naruto's biggest villains and exposes the scared, broken boy underneath all that ideology. And that brings us to the character on our list, whose mask wasn't protecting a secret identity or hiding him from the world. It was protecting an image of perfection. For almost the entire Whole Cake Island arc, Charlotte Katakuri is presented as basically untouchable. He's one of Big Mom's strongest commanders. He's supposedly never lost a fight. His observation haki is so advanced that he can literally see into the future, and according to his siblings, Katakuri is so perfect that this man has never even laid his back on the ground. I mean, to the Charlotte family, he's practically an idol. He's like Jesus in real life. And completing that image is a massive scarf permanently wrapped around the lower half of his face. Then Luffy ruins everything. During their fight, Katakuri takes a break inside his private sanctuary to eat donuts. One of the few times he allows himself to completely drop the persona. He's lying on his back, stuffing his face, happily singing about donuts, when Luffy crashes through the wall and the scarf comes down. Katakuri's mouth is split almost all the way toward his ears, lined with enormous sharp fangs, which is already a massive contrast to the flawless image we'd been sold. But the mouth isn't even the part that bothers Katakuri the most. People see him lying on his back. Suddenly the perfect Charlie Katakuri doesn't exist anymore, and Katakuri absolutely loses it. Because this was never really about looking cool. It was about what happened when he stopped looking perfect. As a child, Katakuri never bothered hiding his mouth. He was loud, aggressive, and completely comfortable with the way he looked, until people started targeting his siblings because of it. After Brûlé was attacked and scarred, Katakuri changed. He covered his mouth. He stopped showing weakness. He built himself into the unbeatable older brother that nobody would ever dare challenge again. And that's what makes his reveal a deconstruction of the flawless idol. The scarf wasn't creating Katakuri's strength, it was creating the illusion that strength required perfection. But Luffy barely even cares. He just wants to beat Katakuri. And as the fight continues, Katakuri slowly stops, protecting the image altogether. The scarf comes off, and this time he leaves it off. For once, he doesn't need to look flawless, he just needs to fight. And ironically, that's when Katakuri becomes even more impressive than the perfect version ever was. Because underneath the undefeated older brother was still a scarred, insecure guy obsessed with donuts. And still one of the strongest people Luffy had ever faced, which makes his reveal one of the rare cases where taking off the mask doesn't expose weakness. It frees the character from having to hide it. Then there is Lelouch v Britannia, whose mask eventually becomes more important than the man underneath it. As Zero, Lelouch hides inside a black helmet with a golden visor, while leading the rebellion against Britannia, which is kind of necessary considering Zero is secretly a Britannian prince. If that face gets exposed, he doesn't just lose anonymity, he risks destroying the trust of the very people following him. For most of the story though, the disguise works. Lelouch gets to remain Lelouch. Zero gets to become something else entirely, a symbol. That's why the moment Suzaku shoots apart his mask hits so hard. Callan looks underneath and realizes the revolutionary leader she trusted is someone she already knew, and worse, a Britannian. Suddenly everything Zero represented clashes with the face standing behind it. But Code Geass doesn't stop there, because eventually Zero becomes so important that Lelouch himself is no longer necessary. That's the immortal symbol. By the time of the Zero Requiem, Lelouch has abandoned the role and turned himself into the hated emperor everyone can unite against. Then Zero appears one final time and kills him in front of the entire world. Except the man underneath the helmet is now Suzaku. And that's the real payoff. Lelouch created Zero to hide his identity. He ended up creating an identity that could survive without him. The face was replaceable, the symbol wasn't. Goblin Slayer has one of the strangest face reveals on this list, because when the helmet finally comes off, the anime still keeps his face away from us. For most of the series, the battered steel helmet is basically part of him. He wears the same rough armor everywhere, speaks in the same flat voice, and moves through the world like someone who has reduced his entire life to one purpose: kill goblins. That distance also extends to the people around him. He works with them, protects them, and even starts relying on them. But there is always something closed off about him. Then the Goblin Lord attacks Cowgirl's farm. For once, Goblin Slayer goes to the guild and asks everyone for help. And they actually come. And after the battle is over, Priestess asks for a simple reward. She wants him to take off the helmet. Goblin Slayer agrees. The whole guild crowds around, finally getting a look at the man they've been fighting beside all this time. And their reaction is almost funny. Underneath all that battered armor is apparently a young, surprisingly handsome guy. But the camera never gives us the same privilege. We catch fragments, angles, and reactions from everyone around him, but never a proper full look. That turns the scene into what you could call the private reveal. The payoff belongs to the people standing around him. After an entire season of keeping everyone at arm's length, Goblin Slayer finally lets the group see the person under the armor. And the fact that we are still kept outside that moment makes it feel strangely personal. Now let's talk about Ken Kaneki, whose mask basically visualizes the identity crisis at the center of Tokyo Ghoul. After receiving Rizei's organs, Kaneki becomes a one-eyed ghoul while still retaining his human mind and memories. So for the early part of the story, he's constantly trying to keep those two lives separate. Around normal people, he hides his Kakugan and tries to pass as the same Kaneki he was before. But once he starts operating in the ghoul world, Yuta gives him a mask specifically designed around what he has become. It's made of black leather, with a zipper across the mouth, exposed artificial teeth, and only his ghoul eye left visible. So weirdly enough, Kaneki spends his normal life hiding the part of him that looks like a ghoul, and then puts on a mask that deliberately makes that part the first thing you notice. And that's where you get to the divided self. The mask gives Kaneki a way to separate the two versions of his life. The human face stays hidden, while the one-eyed ghoul gets to exist openly, at least for a while. Because as the story keeps pushing Kaneki deeper into the ghoul world, that separation becomes harder to maintain. He still has human relationships and emotions, but his body, his hunger, and eventually his place in the conflict all belong to the other side as well. So the mask ends up representing a division that Kaneki himself can never completely make. He can dress like a human, He can put on the face of a ghoul, but underneath both, he's still the same person trying to figure out how those two halves are supposed to coexist.